So with Martin, I just knew that there was this relationship that I was really having a hard time grasping with Joseph. I just couldn't figure out why Joseph loved Martin so much and why he kept him around so much. And so we get in there, we're setting up, they set me down on the floor, they give me my props, they're getting all the lighting and stuff, and they bring Martin in. I have never met Martin in my life. I'd never met Lincoln. I'd never seen Lincoln. I didn't know who they cast until I showed up on set. They bring him in, and Mark says, "Okay, let's run the scene and let's kind of rehearse this with camera, before we roll it." And the first line Lincoln says is, "You asked for my help, but you can't show them to me."
Show them to me.
And he said that line, and immediately all of those feelings I had went away. He was so genuine and so almost childlike and humble. And it completely caught me off guard. And it changed the way that I had rehearsed my lines. Suddenly I was softer in my tone. I was kinder, all of this stuff. And it all came from him delivering his lines that way. And there was just this immediate friendship with Lincoln and with those characters. And I realized, oh, this is the man. Because I read his lines as, "Oh, you asked for my help, but you can't show them to me? Like, come on, what is this?" And Lincoln was so humble and so genuine.
Wow, brothers and sisters, I've been waiting for this moment, and some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. You've seen my posts with Joseph Smith. Well, it's Paul Wuthrich, and I don't know if he's going to always want to be known as the prophet Joseph. Maybe he will, but I'm sure he has other endeavors for his future. But I'm nervous, like a kid in a candy store, happy. And wait, kids in candy stores aren't nervous, are they? They're happy. They're happy there's candy. That's right. So we just had Dan Peterson on, Daniel C. Peterson, who is he the executive director of the Interpreter Foundation?
I think so.
Right.
Sounds right.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, Paul Wuthrich is an actor. He's a father. He was raised in Kaysville, Utah. After graduating from Davis High School, and then he served a full-time LDS mission in Sierra Leone, West Africa. Wow, that's amazing. That it's booming there. The church is booming there. When did you serve there?
So I served there 2011 to 2013. And in fact, just a quick insert on that. So when I was there was no wards, no stakes. And about 18 months into my mission, they created the first stake in the country, and it was the 3,000th stake of the church. So it was kind of this landmark event. It was the first stake in the country.
Beautiful.
And I just met with my mission president today about some things, and we were talking about it, and we were talking about an area I'd served in. It was this little branch, and he said, "Well, that little branch of Wellington is now its own stake, right?" And so there are now 6 or 9 stakes in that country.
Oh,
and
my
a temple
goodness.
has been announced in my old area. So yeah, it is booming. It's incredible, and it was an incredible place.
That is, oh my goodness. That brings a new meaning to, I think about the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And just those in these times who are going to be on the covenant path, the elect of Christ's elect. Yeah. And it's beautiful. Almost like South America was 50 years ago. Amazing. Yeah. So Paul has been in the Utah film industry for several years, from acting to producing and directing. His most recent released role was that of Joseph Smith in Witnesses. We're going to talk about that. He graduated from Weber State with a degree in professional sales and and currently works as a property manager in commercial real estate. He married his best friend Jenny in 2020 and together have one little boy. All right, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So I have drafted some questions. We talked about witnesses. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to leave the link to the interview with Daniel C. Peterson, where we mention, well, he talked about some other things to do with Islamic studies, but we did talk a lot about the three witnesses and the prophet Joseph Smith. Not very often does anybody have the opportunity, well, let alone speak to the prophet himself, but to speak to somebody who played the prophet. Let me start by asking you this, Paul. How did portraying Joseph change or enhance your testimony of his prophethood and of prophets generally?
Yeah. It's interesting to study somebody with the mindset that you're going to portray that person, And so I had spent hours and years studying the prophet Joseph Smith. On my mission, I did this thing where I went through the New Testament and Jesus the Christ, and I decided I really wanted to study anything that pointed into the personality of Jesus Christ, right? So any scripture that I could find, any time he spoke, anything that gave a hint to his personality, I really wanted to, in a way, humanize him. There's kind of this irony with Jesus Christ that he was less human than any of us because he was half God,
Right.
but in a much more real sense, he was more human. He experienced more of what any of us experienced than any of us will ever experience. So he was more human than any of us in that sense, right? And so, I think the same goes with Joseph Smith, right? A lot of times we see him, and he's portrayed very Christ-like, very statured. He's a little older, and he's always composed in a sense. He's got this very prophetic, dignified essence, which I think he absolutely did. But I kind of wanted to get to the bottom of him as a person as well. And so years before Witnesses ever came about, I spent hours listening to, all the Truman Madsen lectures on repeat. I went through
I
that
love
series.
Truman Madsen.
It's so great. And that lecture series he has, a set on his life and who he was, and then he has a set on his teaching. And so, I would just went through those over and over, trying to pick up any little thing about the prophet. And so, as well as my own personal study and of the Doctrine and Covenants and church history and reading. And so I kind of developed this picture of who I thought he was, and this youthful, somewhat emotional guy who seemed like a good friend to me. I'll be honest. I felt like I had the kind of a friendship with this image. And so when I was cast, or when I got this sides for the film, which we can talk about, and I realized that it was going to be a different type of Joseph, I was excited, and I think that came through in the film. I've heard people say that this was one of their favorite renditions of Joseph, or portrayals of Joseph, and that credit really goes to Mark and Russ and the writers and directors of the film, because as an actor, to an extent, you're limited to what's written, right? And so the fact that they wrote him this way allowed me to portray him this way.
So this wasn't method acting?
No,
You
no.
weren't going around pretending you were Joseph Smith wearing the collar up to here and the sorry, I had to
Uh, I like to be myself, but I think I could see a lot of myself in him just because I had spent years getting to know him. But one of the biggest eye openers for me was, again, when you study somebody to portray them, you read something they say, and then you have to think of the motivation behind what they said. And some of those scenes, for example, the dialogue was lifted from accounts. So the scene with Martin Harris when he loses the pages, the dialogue in that scene between Joseph and Martin was lifted from record accounts. That's what they actually said. And so now to get into his mindset and think, okay, what's motivating me to say this thing? What's motivating this character to behave this way, right? And it just kind of opened my mind to one, and this is something that I think that's been talked about, how young they were and how young he was, which was surprising to me. And two, how alone he was for most of his life. If you think, so me and my wife were both divorced before we got married, and I remember talking to my wife while we were dating, and she was talking about how she couldn't really relate to her siblings about what she'd been through, and I said, it's when you go through a major event, whether it's positive or negative, or like a mission, you come home, and it's almost so difficult to express that to anybody, right? Because nobody's been there, nobody has a reference point for what you're talking about, and the closest thing
Right.
would be to find somebody else that's been through something, and even then, they're only attached as far as their experience. And so now imagine you're a 14-year-old kid who's seen God and Jesus Christ and interacted personally with them. You are never going to find anybody that can relate to that experience. And from the moment Joseph walked into that grove of trees and had that experience, he was completely isolated in a sense. Even the people that believed him had no reference point for what he was talking about. And from then on, all the revelations, all the visitations, all of the visions, he was just so distanced from everybody else in his life. And I think that was a big burden on him to feel that weight. And I think that that's one of the reasons I love the story of the witnesses is, he goes home, it's not in the movie, but he goes home and he tells his mom, he goes, finally, I'm no longer alone in this. There's three men who have now witnessed at least this small portion of what I have witnessed. And so there was this burden that was just lifted off of him in that moment.
Yeah, and just to let folks know, this isn't your typical Joseph Smith movie story. This isn't about the first vision. This is well, this goes into before the translation, at, and also during the translation, all of the things that each individual is dealing with personally, and even post translation, to where, like I was talking to Dan before, the things they struggled with. There was bank issues, there was polygamy issues, and it gets into that. And a lot some of the movies that even the church puts out doesn't quite get into their idiosyncrasies, and who they were individually, right? How did you balance portraying Joseph as both a chosen prophet of God and a man with frailties and quirks? Like, were you able to leave some of the things that maybe you were going through in normal life behind when you were playing the prophet? And I don't want to load this question too much, but did you feel carried? Did you feel like Heavenly Father was in? Because not very many people have played. I mean, yeah, you could probably count on more than two hands how many people have played the prophet since the Restoration, whether in a play or in a movie back in the 1920s, all the way up until the 1970s, and even modern. There's been a few people, but not very many. And even to this degree, did you feel carried? Did you feel like Heavenly Father was, in a sense, endowing you with something that helps you transcend the prophet?
Um, no, it's interesting, just how the Lord's hand is in so much, right? So, yeah, short answer is absolutely, I did. Um, so the way when you're a low on the totem pole actor like me, you don't get a whole lot of information about a film before it's cast, right? Essentially, so you'll get a notification, hey, they're having auditions. They send you sides, which is one or two pages of the script. Usually, it's one scene, could be two scenes. You memorize. You spend hours working the dialogue, memorizing it, coming up with choices.
Right, right.
Show up to the audition. There's six or seven people that look like better looking versions of yourself, right? And so that's always intimidating. And then they call you in, and there's usually a casting director and a reader. Sometimes there's a director or somebody from the actual project. You give it everything you've got, and in all of 3 to 5 minutes, it's over. They say thank you, you leave, and 99% of the time, at least in my experience, you never hear back. Right. So it is a process of rejection on rejection. I mean, it's like I'm in sales now. I graduated in sales. It's like doing sales, but you are the product, and you're selling yourself, and you're just being rejected constantly. And so
Right.
it can be a little discouraging. And when I walked into the room to audition, the two scenes that were given to me for the audition, the first one was the scene where Joseph Smith loses his temper with Martin Harris, and the
Oh,
second one
great.
is where Oliver Cowdery confronts Joseph about polygamy. And I thought, whoa, this is going to be a very different portrayal of Joseph and church history. And the way it was written, I just thought, man, I really want to be part of this project. And so it had always been a dream of mine to play Joseph Smith. Because of all the studying that I had done, I had this character that I had already spent years developing, and I just hoped that I would be able to portray that someday. And when I walked into the room, Mark, the director, and Russ, the producer, were sitting in the audition room. And it just so happened that 2 years prior to that, I had worked with Mark and Russ on a project called Joseph Smith American Prophet, where I played Sidney Rigdon. It was produced by Lee Groberg. And at that time, Mark was, I believe he was DP. And the first day on set, when I got out of my car for that project, he looked at me, and it had been a videotape audition. And he said, "Hey, what's your name again?" And I said, "Paul Wuthrich." And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, your audition was pretty good. Well, let's hope you're that good on camera."
Great.
And so I was like, "All right, my goal is to make this guy happy." So the last day I filmed, I went up and I said, "Hey, how did I do?" And he kind of smiled and he's like, "Yeah, you did a good job." So little did I know at that time he was working on the script for Witnesses, and he had in my mind, he said, "That's my Joseph." And 2 years later, I walked in the audition room. I did those scenes with him and Russ, and I ended up getting the part. And one of the things I would do when I studied the script is I would go through and write how old Joseph Smith was during the time periods. I would look up the back history of each scene. I would look up the history of what went into it, try and get a sense for Joseph's personal life, what he was going through at the time, and as I was doing this, I'd write his age, and it was eye opening because I kept writing numbers like 23, 24, 27, 26, 27. And I was 27 at the time we filmed it. And
Wow.
I could not believe that this guy did what he did at the age he did it. It just it blew me away. And so there was multiple times where I had done all I could do as far as study goes. I memorized the script. I show up on set. We rehearse the set or the scene, and right as we're getting to get ready to start shooting, I would pray and I'd say, Heavenly Father, uh, I have to do this justice. I have to do this right. And if there's anything that I've missed, you know, open my mind, open my heart to be able to feel and experience this. And there was many times where suddenly I would receive an insight, suddenly I would think of something in a new way, or just a feeling would come that would alter the way the scene would go. And and it happened multiple times. And I think for me, one of the things I loved, well, I'll tell you my favorite scene. My favorite scene when I was reading the script and shooting the script was the scene where David, or I'm sorry, Martin and Joseph are skipping rocks on the river. And Joseph, Martin's asking about the seer stone, and there's some plot happening that
Right,
he
right,
wants to
right.
see it, and Joseph is skipping rocks, and he picks up this big rock and he just
I
throws the whole
remember that.
thing into the river. And I read that and I thought, this is Joseph. Right there, that right there is the Joseph that I have wanted to see and the Joseph that I want to play. And I loved, and in fact, it's interesting because it seems like such a small scene, even though that really did happen, right? They would go out and take breaks and they would just go skip rocks to give themselves a break. Well, there's a line where Martin asks, he says, "Can I try it?" And Joseph says, "No, but that's not going to stop you from asking again, is it?" And I remember thinking that seems a little harsh, and I need to say that, but I need to say it with like kind of love. And so I remember saying that line, and there's kind of a little twinkle there of like, no, but I love you, and I know you're going to keep asking. And I was really worried about that line before we shot the scene. And we shot that scene, and as we were walking away, the scripty uh, on set said, that's my favorite Joseph I've ever seen. And it's because Mark wrote him in such a way that he had that human element, that approachability, the humor, the sorrow, all of those in between colors of a person that sometimes you just don't get when they're always in prophet mode. If that
Right.
makes sense.
No, it does. We've had, okay, so in the last, I would say within the last 7 to 10 years, we've had Nathan Mitchell play Joseph Smith. We've had John Foss, who also played Jesus Christ, um, play Joseph Smith. And you. Well, there's been maybe a few others that I might be missing. Uh, but those are the main ones. And you. I'm not just saying this. They did a good job. Okay, so I'm not going to say that you were the best, but there was something, especially that scene where he picks up the rock and throws it. And I remember because my wife kind of giggled at that, and I said, "What are you laughing at?" And she goes, "Did you see he just?" And she rewound it. She goes, "He picks up this rock and he throws it in." And that's exactly what came. I kid you not, Paul. That's what came to our minds was that's something that Joseph Smith would have done, um, because Joseph wasn't. He was very intellectual, but all the things that I've learned from Truman G. Madsen and other scholars, uh, who else talks about? Well, Dan Peterson talks about Joseph Smith a lot. Tons of people that have studied, and Truman G. Madsen, one of the most, but that he wasn't a okay, Richard Bushman, he's another one. That he wasn't. He was intellectual, but today I told Dan he would be bungee jumping, he would be skiing, he would be mountain climbing, uh, he would be in high school wrestling. He would be in probably even a college wrestler. He was that guy that would get his degree, but also sports would be really important to him.
Yeah, and
That's
he probably would be the guy that didn't get a great GPA.
right, right, because he didn't spell that well. Um, Emma even said that he couldn't draft a very good letter. Was it Emma or his mother that said that?
I think
I think
Emma.
I think it was Emma. Yeah. Um,
But his learning really was so spiritual driven, right? It was just his mental capacity was so opened because of his calling.
yeah. Yeah. No, totally. You know, as far as the spiritual experiences are concerned, I don't know if you want to talk about. I mean, I want to. There are sacred things. We know that, and I don't want to discuss any of them if you don't feel comfortable, or maybe there's some you do want to discuss. Uh, but were there moments where you felt the spirit really strong, Paul? And what if you don't mind taking some liberties talking about some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say it was a. I mean, the spirit was a constant resource, is how I would say it. Right. I relied heavily on it for so many scenes, and there was different spiritual experiences in different ways. For example, one would be a few having to do with Martin Harris. Actually, when I my personal study growing up, I didn't really study the life of Martin Harris too much, but I could say that from what I did know about him, I didn't really like him. I was never really a fan. I always thought growing up, you hear the stories of him just kind of pestering Joseph,
Right.
and he kind of had a sour taste in my mouth, and and so
We grew up not liking Sydney and Martin.
yeah, he kind of get a tough rap.
From primary and seminary, we always heard negative things about him, right?
Yeah, and and so as I'm reading the script, there's all these scenes, right? And so the very first day of shooting, we get up and we're in Upper Canada Village, and I'm walking to set, and the first scene I was shooting was the scene where they're in the wood shop and Joseph is burying the plates under the floorboards. And they give you a little copy of your script. It's called your sides for the day. It has all the scenes that they're doing. It has kind of the schedule breakdown. So I'm just reviewing my lines, heading there, and all I'm thinking is, my goodness, this guy drives me crazy. This guy, I can't stand this guy. And I'm supposed to be his friend. I'm supposed to have this friendly relationship. I don't know why Joseph just doesn't tell him to beat it. And I had studied the scene prior, and it was always that same feeling. Every time I came to the scene, I just had this battle and this struggle. And so we get into the
So
wood
let me
shop. There's
stop you there real quick. So what you're saying is in acting, you actually get, because I've never acted before, so I don't know. You actually get that involved with your character at times. Like if you're acting something that really happened in history, you guys are really almost enemies at that moment.
I mean, there's definitely those feelings, yeah, to be authentic, right? And that's one of the things that makes it believable. It's very hard to lie on camera in that sense. So on a stage, you stage is a portrayal. You're portraying this emotion. You're displaying an emotion for somebody on the back row, right? Whether the amount to which it's genuine is almost secondary, because the person on the back row has to see it, if that makes sense. Whereas
Yeah.
on film, you got a camera in your face. Uh, it's difficult to fake some of those things
Right. Right.
because the camera will see right through you.
One little lift of your eyebrow could screw something up. It could send a different emotion, right?
Exactly. So there's this sense of uh, you want to be present, you want to be in the moment, and that's one of the things I love about acting. It's like chaos, chaos, chaos. They say rolling, everything goes quiet. They say action, and you're just kind of there with that person, and there's kind of this organic realness to it, right? Even though it's not real, um, but yeah, you try and get in touch with that so that it is genuine. Um, and so it was
Well, and
difficult because
you compartmentalize it. I mean, you don't really hate the person that he's your friend, he's an actor, and you guys, eat sandwiches together off when you're not acting, but you but so you can compartmentalize it. But that's interesting that you literally start and you have to conjure up those emotions though.
yeah, and I'm any actor that listens to this might just say this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, because when it comes to your method of acting, it's been so long since I've really studied that. But one thing that I remember from high school, and I used to do stage acting, but I was always a stage actor. The smaller the stage, the better for me. I like small audiences, intimate stage settings. The closer I was to the audience, the better, because I was always more of an intimate actor, less of like a display actor. And so that just came easier to me. And so transitioning into film was nice for me because it was where I felt comfortable in these kind of close quarters. But there's something called emotional memory recall, and so you look back on experiences in your life as you study, and as much as you can take from their experience, you mesh that with your own personal experiences so that the emotion, the feeling is genuine, it's real. And so you kind of go back and pick up on those moments. And so really when a director casts, he's casting you or that actor for a reason, right? Because there's something in their natural performance, their natural personality that's a reflection of what they want to see in the character, or they can bring that out. And and
Right.
so with Martin, I just knew that there was this relationship that I was really having a hard time grasping with Joseph. I just couldn't figure out why Joseph loved Martin so much and why he kept him around so much. And so we get in there, we're setting up, they set me down on the floor, they give me my props, they're getting all the lighting and stuff, and they bring Martin in. I have never met Martin in my life. I'd never met Lincoln. I'd never seen Lincoln. I didn't know who they cast until I showed up on set. They bring him in, and Mark says, "Okay, let's run the scene and let's kind of rehearse this with camera, before we roll it." And the first line Lincoln says is, "You asked for my help, but you can't show them to me."
Show them to me.
And he said that line, and immediately all of those feelings I had went away. He was so genuine and so almost childlike and
Right.
humble. And it completely caught me off guard. And it changed the way that I had rehearsed my lines. Suddenly I was softer in my tone. I was kinder, all of this stuff. And it all came from him delivering his lines that way. And there was just this immediate friendship with Lincoln and with those characters. And I realized, oh, this is the man. Because I read his lines as, "Oh, you asked for my help, but you can't show them to me? Like, come on, what is this?" And Lincoln was so humble and so genuine.
He just seemed very humble. In his moments where Martin Harris is crying, uh, you just it made you cry.
Yeah.
You know, that's his name, the actor Lincoln, right? Yeah, when he stands up, when he's with the Community of Christ, or when he joins the other church, and then they want to disavow the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
and he stands up and he bears testimony of it. That was the neat thing about Witnesses to me too, was that you guys, I could sense your guys' real testimonies, and it came out in the acting. Um, it it wasn't just an act. So I don't know, that's neat. That's neat that you've got members of the church that are playing people that really felt, had these revelations, and you yourselves have had your own uh, personal revelations in your lives, whether it be the manifestation of the Holy Ghost, or whatever. You understand what those spiritual experiences feel like, maybe to a different degree, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. And it was cool that, me and Lincoln were members, but David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery were not members.
Really?
And
Oh my
the
goodness.
actor that played old David that giving the interview, he was also a non-member.
Okay. Can I tell you something? The guy that played David Whitmer,
Michael Zakola.
Michael Zakola, my wife and I were like, doesn't he remind you of Paul Giamatti, the guy that played John Adams? Do you know who?
I spent my entire academic career studying the Great Depression. The Depression may have started because of a stock market crash, but what hit...
I am right here.
Lie, and all will be forgiven.
I am afraid I might disappoint you. The truth is, it is not a lie.
Paul Giamatti is? Okay. He reminded me of it, his demeanor, his idiosyncrasies, almost like he could be his son. And it's funny that you said, and I'm not just saying this, Paul, when you said that those two weren't members, it almost felt, he kind of did have something about him, the actor that played David Whitmer, that I did question. I was like, I wonder if he's a member of the church. Not because he was like acting in any bad way, but I don't know. But that's interesting. That's funny. That's so cool.
This film was cast out of, we filmed in uh, Upper Canada Village. We filmed in old Sturbridge Village, which is a place in Massachusetts. It's kind of like a living museum type
Uh-huh.
of thing. And then we filmed in Utah. But uh, Oliver and Caleb, who played Oliver, and Lincoln were cast out of LA. I was cast out of Utah, and both David Whitmers were cast out of Massachusetts, Boston area. And so it was kind of this wide net that was cast.
Right.
And it was hilarious. I mean, again, I'd never met these people. I didn't know who was playing who. I didn't know any of the other actors. I've been in the film industry a long time. However, I just don't know many of the players. I had, have kind of transitioned out of it. And so when we get on set, we're driving from the hotel up to set, and there's this wild kid in in the van with a Boston accent, just kind of swearing up a storm. And I'm like, who is this guy playing?
That's
And
David Whitmer.
and it's David Whitmer. And then Caleb's like, hey, this is like a religious movie, right? And he goes, oh, beep. He's like, I'm sorry, I should cut that out. Just swears in his
Oh my
apology. I
goodness
thought,
gracious.
this is going
That's
to be
funny.
interesting. And it was so perfect. They were so good. And I loved that they weren't. I love that you have these men who are new to this, right? David Whitmer doesn't know anything about the Book of Mormon, doesn't know anything about church, doesn't know anything about old Joe Smith. You have Oliver Cowdery who's experiencing this for the first time. And sometimes I think as members of the church, when we get called or cast to play these guys, maybe out of a sense of respect, you almost think, oh yes, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Joseph Smith, and there's this presence that you associate with them, these men, these great men of the church and of history. And it's easy to leave the rest, on the table, so to speak, all the personality, all of the little things of, that genuineness of trying to figure this out. So an
Right.
example, when Hiram Page gets those pages of Revelation, there's that scene where they're asking Joseph, well, you said everybody could get revelation, and now this guy got revelation, and now you're saying that it's false revelation. You know, you, how is this supposed to work? And Joseph has to say, look, this is how the church is organized, right? No man will receive revelation for the church except me, essentially. And after that scene, we went walking. We would just go on these walks up in Canada, and me and Caleb, the guy who played Oliver Cowdery, were walking, and
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "So I don't understand." And we just started talking about the scene, and we had, and then Michael came and joined us. We had a 3-hour conversation about what is the role of a prophet, why do we structure things the way that we do in the church, what is a priesthood line of revelation authority, and what's a personal revelation, and what's the difference there. And so it was so cool to be able to almost play that role in real life as this teacher, as they would ask questions about scenes, about the church, about all of this stuff, and then to have that show on camera that they're experiencing this for the first time with their characters. And I just think it brought this genuine approach to those, and because they approached it as an actor, right? They really approached it as an actor, and not, hey, I'm a church member, gonna be
Right.
a church history figure.
So let me ask you this, just kind of sidestepping here, because I'm just curious. So the guy that played David Whitmer, he's riding in the car with you. Is that what you said? And he's kind
Yeah,
of using some other than nice language, right? Or
yeah.
worldly language. And so, do these actors, are they just constantly playing sometimes B-roll movies, and they're just moving around from movie to movie? And I'm not saying that you guys were like B-roll, or
Oh
that's
yeah.
not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I mean, are these actors, are they just moving around from script to script, and then they just like knock it out of the park like in an instant?
It's different for everybody. Caleb had his own business. It was an online business that he would run. And so he was essentially his own boss. He was constantly working, in between scenes. If he was off for a scene, he'd be over on his laptop getting work done.
Okay.
And then he did a lot of filming. He would fly to Atlanta a lot and do auditions. And I don't know what his current status is. Michael also ran his own business. He had a cleaning business that he ran, and so it's just kind of this life of.
So Caleb is David Whitmer.
Or I'm sorry, Caleb is Oliver Cowdery.
Okay. And so the guy that played David,
Uh,
the young David.
yes, Michael Zakola. So he's from Massachusetts, and he had his own kind of
Right.
cleaning business.
So what I'm saying is how long did it take him to be able to integrate into the role?
He was amazing. Both these guys were incredible.
They're talented.
Same thing. You know, you get on set and you start going through hair, you go through wardrobe, and then all of a sudden you're dressed in Pioneer clothes and you can no longer see his tattoos and you know, and you get on set and you start running the lines. I'm like, holy crap, it's David Whitmer.
Wow.
You know, they're just on it. And I loved both of their performances. Every time I watched the film, there's a moment where Oliver is standing in the rain, listening in on the Smiths conversation, and they bring him inside, and his facial expressions are just so perfect. His demeanor, his presence, and he was that type of person in real life. Very well put together. Hair was always meticulous, and he dressed nice, and I think he drove a BMW, just very Oliver-esque in the present day.
He looked just like Oliver.
He looked just like him.
So I had all my kids around watch. I said, we're going to watch Witnesses, and I brought the family out, and we all got popcorn, and my kid that likes to be on video games, we had to drag him out into the living room, and we turned it on, and I'm going to tell you, at first I'm thinking, okay, it's probably just going to be like another church production, but it's going to bring the spirit, and we're going to feel good that we watched it, right? I was hooked. I was intrigued. I was glued. And where was I going with this? Come on. I was in Oliver, thank you. So I take out my phone and I pull up that picture that we have of Oliver, that photo where he's young, and he's looking like a school teacher, Oliver Cowdery. And I say, kids, and I showed my wife, I go, Andrea already knew, but Andrea, my wife, she already knew, but I showed the kids and I go, this is the real Oliver Cowdery. And they're like, what? And even you've got high cheekbones, you've got blue eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got a little bit of a turned up Irish nose, slightly, like myself, but you still had the features, the lips and everything. It's interesting because I don't think that picture that they found recently with the locket, but that's my opinion. I don't think
it is either, but
but even you've got the look. Oliver had the look. That's neat. That's so cool. Did I interrupt you? Because I had another question.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you already covered that. Let me see. You mentioned turning down a role that would have paid very well. In one of your interviews, I think you talked about, or maybe an article that I can't remember if I read this or I watched it, but that would have potentially boosted your career. Actually, I think you and I were talking about it on the phone. The reason being that the role was inappropriate, and basically you said that it went against our values, which I think is noble. You are that is Joseph Smith-esque, right? Have you seen blessings, Paul, as a result of that decision, or did you see instant? Well, not instant, but did you see blessings from making that decision?
Yeah, I think for context, I'll just give a little backstory about that, about why I guess that stands out, right? Sometimes you get a role, it's inappropriate, it's easy to turn down, but for a while I was fully invested in doing film, which I'm not anymore. But I was trying to act, produce, and direct anything I could in the film industry. And, I was the textbook definition of, the starving actor, right? I was living with this roommate of mine who took me in because I didn't have anywhere else to go. We were interning on a television series on the production side of things. It was an unpaid internship that lasted a long time. And so I went months and months without pay. And he just let me bum in his house because he was a great guy. And so we became good friends. But I mean, we literally, I would just book a job once a month, twice a month, something like that. And I'd get a few $100s so we could buy groceries. And over the course of a few months, I lost 10 pounds because we just weren't eating enough to maintain my body weight, right? We just didn't have the money to eat like I wanted to eat.
Right.
Yeah, heavy guy, but anyway. And so, yeah, it was a tough time. I'm always wondering, am I going to have enough money to put gas in my car to drive home on Sunday? Am I going to have enough money to, put gas to go to church? And it was rough. So after months of doing this and going on auditions, I received an audition. Sometimes my agency that I had, they would send me auditions. They wouldn't tell me what it's for. It's like, hey, we booked you for an audition. Are you available? They wouldn't tell me what it was for. And then the day before the audition, you would get the sides. And at that point, if it's under 24 hours, you really can't cancel the audition. You do that once or twice with these casting directors, and they just think, okay, don't bring this guy in because he's constantly canceling, right? And so you have to take the audition. And I get the sides, and it's for a YouTube Red series, and it's a semi-recurring role, but it would pay like $1,000 a day, which was and would be a great deal right now, honestly. But yeah, and so I go in, and it's just crude, a bunch of F words. It's sexual content, and I thought, I don't even know why I'm auditioning for this. And so I go in. There's a casting director from LA who was sent out to cast a show. I do the read, and she says, sit down, and she says, if you want this part, it's yours. But there's another part who's a supporting lead, who's a recurring character, multiple episodes, main cast type of character. And that's yours if you want it. But, you can see from the script that it's adult content. There's some crudeness, there's some sexuality. And, I think she described the character as kinky. And she said, so think about it and let me know. And, I just remember walking out and being a little bit discouraged because, I'm thinking in Utah, I'm just not expecting all the roles to be like this. And there was more than I had anticipated. And here I'm given this role on a $1 million an episode budgeted project, $1,000 a day recurring, and casting director out of LA. And I just thought, man, I have to turn this down, and it was tough in that sense that, you just have no idea where your next paycheck's coming from. You know that you're turning this down and they're not going to call you back again. And your agent's going to be mad. And so I did. And in a large sense, it's because one of my goals all through my single years was, I didn't want to be in anything that I would be embarrassed to have my kids watch.
Right.
I never wanted my kids to pull up something of me and me be ashamed or embarrassed to show them what I did. And so it was tough, and in that sense, and immediately no blessings came. I'll be honest. I think it's not like I was rewarded the next week with a good role. It wasn't like I got a paying job anytime soon. I didn't. That was my only offer for some time, and life was still hard, and it was still tough to catch even the smallest of little breaks. And from that sense, nothing came of it. But I will say that years later, when I got this part as Joseph Smith, and I'm going around and I'm speaking at devotionals and I get to share my testimony, that I'm glad that I can stand up there and share my testimony and not have these kids pull me up on their phone and find some rated R project that I worked on. Right. I think it would undermine me. And again, there's like this weird element. There's something weird where I had a friend, I was asked, this lady, a woman was giving a lesson on the witnesses, and she asked if she could talk to me. about it, in preparation for a lesson, share any insights. And I had a friend who's like, well, why does he want to talk to you? It's not like you're actually Joseph Smith, And I'm like, yeah, it's true, but people want to believe that somebody who's playing the prophet is a decent person. And whether that's fair or not fair, whether, that's right or not right, I think is irrelevant to the fact that I want to feel like a good person and I want to feel like I'm doing this character justice on screen and off screen. And, I auditioned for the Book of Mormon series. I was one of the 3 finalists to play Jesus Christ. And we had to sign a paper when I was submitting for that. It was reviewed by committees. It was 6 months of audition process, that I had never done anything that would reflect poorly on the church, and that I would not take any roles if given that role that would reflect poorly on the church. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm so glad that I didn't take that role. And even though I didn't get cast, I felt proud that I had not done it, and it was an amazing experience.
You would
Just
have been a good Jesus.
thanks.
You almost kind of look like the Jesus from I would say, when was that? About 17 years ago.
When they did
From the
the
Testaments.
Yeah. The one that looked like he made, well, I won't get into the Jesuses I like and the ones I don't, but I'm not too hip on the one that's in the new Book of Mormon movies. He looks like a Jesus that makes friendship bracelets at the beach. But John Foss, is that his name?
Yeah, I love John.
He looks like a carpenter. But not to put down the guy that played Jesus in the Book of Mormon videos that we have recently, but I'm sorry, but he doesn't do it for me. And then the one from about, was it where the other one where he's coming down out of heaven 17 years ago?
The Testaments.
The Testaments. I liked him. My wife wasn't too hip on that Jesus. But John Foss, I like him. He's Jesus.
I hope John doesn't mind me telling this story. I worked with John on Joseph Smith, American Prophet. We got tarred and feathered together. Mm-hmm. And he was so great to work with. Oh, he was great. And anyway, we were in the dressing room or the hair and makeup room. We're getting ready, and I keep looking at him. I'm like, man, this guy looks familiar, because he's like got red hair, right? And he doesn't look anything like Jesus. His beard and long dark hair. And then finally, I said, holy cow, you played Christ. And he goes, yeah. I said, man, I just got to tell you, those videos started, the very first videos of that dropped while I was on my mission. And I remember seeing the scene where they were whipping Christ. And you see John, and he's strapped up. And I said, man, that Christ has some stature. He's got some muscle. He's built. And I told John, I said, I've always wanted to see a Christ that had more stature, because to be able to physically withstand what he went through, I've always felt like he couldn't be kind of this very light and feathery type of person.
Lanky guy, right?
Yeah. I said, I really appreciate the fact that you had some weight on you, some strength. And he just he smiled and he said, wow, he's like, you're probably one of the only ones that said that, but he's like, but I appreciate it because I consciously did that. I gained weight and tried to alter my diet in a way that would give me a physique that was powerful yet somewhat accurate with the time period. And I thought, man, really? I love that. He's so great. I love him as Christ.
Yeah.
And he's a great guy.
I mean, he did a good job with Joseph Smith, but he just didn't look like him. But I think people that play Joseph Smith, like you say, they kind of not channel him. I don't mean that in a spooky way. I mean, they have to channel something that you go back to as you grew up in the church. I think it would be hard, and this is my opinion, but I think it would be hard to play for an actor to play Joseph Smith if he wasn't raised in primary and seminary and family home evenings or going to church and just growing up learning about Joseph Smith.
I think there is something to having a reference point for Joseph. I mean, as an actor, you're always trying to find these reference points for your character, and I think Joseph Smith is one of those people that it would be difficult if you don't have a reference point for feeling the Holy Ghost. If you don't have a reference point for receiving revelation, if you don't have a reference point for so many things that made him who he was, I think it'd be difficult. And honestly, I think the reason my portrayal of him worked was just because of the writing and the directing. I look even at my age now, I don't think I could play the Joseph Smith in Joseph Smith, Prophet of the Restoration that the church put out. I just don't, the way he was written, the way he was portrayed, I don't think I have the stature for it. I don't think I don't know, maybe, but I don't know. It was written differently. It was, everything about it was so different that I don't think I probably would have been the right choice for that casting. And so I was just so blessed that the Joseph they wrote lined up with the Joseph that I knew from my study, and that those things just kind of came together.
My favorite part. So we'll wrap this up. When does? But before I ask you about Undaunted, my favorite parts because I think I know when I watch movies, church movies, especially that are portraying the prophet Joseph Smith, people are watching you even more intently. They're saying, can this guy pull it off? Right? They're not just watching a movie. They're watching you. You know that too, don't you?
Well,
they're going,
and a
is
guy
this
like
guy going to pull it off?
Everybody's got an expectation, right? Everybody's got their own opinion, and a strong opinion with Joseph Smith. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And
Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, Dan Peterson mentioned on your podcast the scene where he got some pushback on our age, how young we were, which I felt intimidated by until I realized that Joseph Smith was actually my age at the time. But the second thing, he said he got a little pushback on the scene where Joseph buries their son and he lost his temper. I don't know if you remember that scene.
yeah, and I was just going to tell you that was one of my favorite scenes, not because he lost his temper, but because you did a good job. Well done. It was. Yeah, but go ahead. I had some questions, but you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that scene, that was another scene where the Spirit just kind of came in and saved me. I had done all of this work building up to that scene, and Dan Peterson was actually on set for that one. He was on set for a couple days, and that was one of the days he was on set. Him and his wife came because that was a really intense scene. It was very emotional, and they kind of came up and said, we just want to make sure you get this, which is always a little intimidating when you want to do good for Mark and the director and obviously everybody on set, but then the executive producers come and it's like, hey, don't mess this up. It's like, oh, okay, I was feeling good, but now I'm nervous. And they, at the time I was not married. I'd never had kids. And so I'm thinking, okay, just praying as they're getting set up, how can I do this justice? And one thing to keep in mind, and I think this is important when you look at church history, just like in our personal lives, there's always multiple factors that go into a single moment, right? There's always multiple things at play. So that scene, for example, you have Joseph, who is a new husband and was to be a new father. So you have this strain on your relationship with Joseph and Emma, and this tragedy that's just happened. He's just lost his son. You also have the fact that the manuscript was taken by Martin Harris, your only friend, your only ally in the work, and now he's gone. You have no idea what's going on. You have the fact that Joseph feels like he's been cut off from God at a vital and critical point in his life, where now everything seems to be going wrong. You have Joseph questioning himself as a prophet. You have Emma, not only the strain from losing your child, but now Emma's questioning you as a person, as a prophet, all of these things. There's so many characters in that scene, even though it's just Joseph and Emma. There's all of this weight. Then you add on the fact that Joseph's 24, 25, something like that, very young. You have, all the weight that's put on his family, siblings at home, the fact that he's had to leave home to do this translation, right? All of this stuff. So all of this is compounding and compounding and compounding until you get to this moment where Emma says, what's not being said is, aren't you a prophet? Like, can't you do something about this? And suddenly she calls Joseph out, right? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know. And so we're shooting this scene, and we start with a master shot. And so the camera's far away, everything's in view, and then they move tighter, and then they shoot over the shoulders. So you're doing the scene multiple times. And they start on this wide shot, and Emma says, aren't you a prophet? And I just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And she walks away, and I just fall to my knees, and I just felt this sadness I had never experienced before. Just this, it's like something opened up where I just didn't know I could feel that type of loss. And suddenly I became so frustrated and so angry at her, at Martin, at God, at my situation, at myself for not listening. And I just had that shovel, and I just lost it. And I start pounding the dirt as hard as I can out of sheer frustration and desperation. And I just lost it. And I run out of energy, and I kind of break down, and they call cut. And, suddenly I'm kind of coming back, and I think, whoa, I think I just went overboard with that. I think that may have been a little too far. And Mark just says, great, I love it. Let's do it again. And so, credit to Mark and to Dan who see something like that some people might shy away from. And the last thing I wanted to do was disrespect Joseph, right? To portray him in a way that was disrespectful. But I realized in that moment that by not showing those moments, by not showing that struggle, by not showing that rage and that hurt and all of that stuff, it would almost do more disrespect than to show it. Right. In my thoughts and feelings, it was like, to honor this man who I love and admire, and who I hope to stand before someday and be proud of what I did. I just felt you have to go there, to represent him honestly, and to create empathy with people, to show them, look, this guy is judged so harshly by our standards, but there's all this other stuff that he went through that we just have no idea.
Well, that's what I loved about it. You actually you answered the questions that I had. You to have a prophet. That's what I love about witnesses, portraying Book of Mormon witnesses that had issues with the prophet even after they saw an angel. Okay? A lot of people think if you see an angel or you see God, life's going to be peachy from there on out, or that you're not going to ever doubt. But you show a prophet man, it portrays a prophet man that doubts even after the first vision, even after he saw angels, And the other scene I like too is when you're with the witnesses and you kneel with all three of them, and then Martin gets up and has to leave because he's doubting, right? And he feels like he is the cause of the angel not coming. You never really see an angel, but you see the light from the angel, right? Shining on you. I like the expression on your face. And I bet you studied that too. That's just my thoughts, that maybe you studied it to see what would Joseph be, what would he look like if he was seeing the angel. He didn't show surprise because he had seen the angel before, or he had visions like that before. But he also wasn't overly emotional because he was constantly in the spirit, and he comprehended even that spirit that accompanied the angel. So the expression you had on your face was perfect. It was, yeah, it almost, no, go
Go ahead.
ahead.
Um, so yeah, when you study something like that, it's obviously you want to be aware of what you're expressing, but for me, it's what am I feeling, and if I feel it, it will be expressed, right? If I'm in that moment, and so I remember specifically going into that moment, knowing exactly, and seeking revelation on what I would feel. And so I am just curious, as a viewer watching it, what did you see expressed on my face?
That's what I was trying to figure out. When you mean when you see the angels at two different times, one time with Martin Harris and the other with Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, right?
Yeah, like the first time when it comes up with David and Whitmer.
Okay. I see, how do I explain this? It is difficult. It's a smile, but it's a um I think part of it is because we know the history behind it. Part of it is relief that he's not alone anymore in this, I think. Am I right? And the other part, did I get that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And the other part is, yes, angels speak to men these days. Yes, I am. I am. I'm happy and overjoyed that I am. I don't know. You know what I'm saying. But I think the main thing is that I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was two very different emotional responses.
Oh wait. Here's the other one. I'm sorry. The other one is I can't get enough of these heavenly beings.
Yeah,
You
You
know
know
what
what
I
I
mean?
mean?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was interesting to do that with David and Oliver, and then to do it with Martin alone. Uh, that scene they were both incredibly spiritual experiences. The scene with Martin, you got that. That's exactly what I'm glad that came across, because that's exactly what I was feeling. There's this moment of just relief that I knew it was coming. It had been revealed to me that it would happen. Or, I'm sorry, Joseph.
Right,
Right,
Um,
right.
right.
and so when it appears, it is just this gratitude, this sense of relief, that sense of this burden almost just being lifted. And with Martin, though, we were setting up for that shot, and Martin's praying. I'm behind him a distance. I kind of walk around these trees and come up behind him, and I kneel down. They're setting up the camera, and it was one of those times where I thought, okay, Heavenly Father, open my heart, open my mind to what I need to experience in this moment to make this meaningful, because it is different than what I just went through. And as I'm praying, as I'm watching Martin kneel, I had this very distinct impression and feeling come over me that said, uh, Paul, you need to forgive Martin Harris. It's time for you to forgive him, because I've forgiven him, and Joseph forgave him, and now it's time for you and the people of this church to forgive him. He's not, he's not the black sheep. He's not this problem that happened. He was so loved, and it hit me so strong, and I said, okay, I forgive him. And we walked up, or I walked up, they called action, I walked up, I knelt down, and as I was praying, I literally was just praying for him. God, he deserves this, you know and when that angel appeared, it was it was just such a different experience emotionally, because it was not a relief for me in that moment, it was a relief for him. And it
Yeah.
was like, it was this moment of, and then I say, the Lord loves you and I love you. And Joseph did, and God did. Martin Harris was an incredibly faithful man, an incredibly great man, and God loved and loves him, and Joseph loved and loves him, and
I
I
think
love
that
him.
absolutely, and that's a perfect thing for us to end on. I think that that's good. Unless you have more that
You
you
wanna
want to
talk
talk
about?
That's
about.
great.
I think we really, this is, thank you so much for being Joseph-esque. Is it esque? Yeah, Joseph-esque, right?
Yeah,
I always ask my wife. She's usually behind me over there. Is it, did I say that right? Or Joseph S?
Joseph-esque.
Is that right? Joseph-esque?
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry. I'm going to cut all these times out that I asked you.
No worries.
I don't like, oh, and the, okay. So let me ask you this just real quick. So yeah, thank you for being a good, virtuous, upstanding, Joseph-esque type of guy, and for making good choices in your life, because I do believe that Heavenly Father does uh, have the ultimate decision on who He casts as the prophet. Maybe,
I
I
think
think,
I like to think
unless,
he at least had a hand in it.
yeah, you know what I mean. All right, so Undaunted, that's out already, right?
Yep.
that's
That's a docudrama
Yes.
on the movie Witnesses, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, witnesses raises, it kind of poses questions, right? The Safety Society Bank, all these things that surround the drama. And the goal of Undaunted was to then take those and expound on them with historical accounts, additional footage. It shows Martin Harris being rebaptized. It kind of finishes up some of those loose ends, so to speak, that the witnesses kind of went into, but maybe didn't maybe answer everything. Undaunted is a two-part docudrama with footage from the film and additional footage that was shot that explores that history.
okay.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. That makes sense to me. Thank
Thank
you
you
so much, Paul.